The annual Miller family reunion was in full swing at my uncle's Hampton estate, a gathering that always felt more like a corporate shareholders meeting than a family celebration. The air was thick with designer perfume and the distinct scent of old money superiority. I sat in my usual spot, the corner of the garden where the less successful family members were expected to stay, nursing my champagne while watching my cousins Bradley and Jennifer hold court near the pool. "Did you hear?" Jennifer's voice carried across the perfectly manicured lawn. "Emma's still running that little supply company. Isn't it just adorable?" Bradley, adjusting his Rolex, laughed. "Some people just don't understand real business. While we're making million-dollar deals at Morgan Stanley, she's probably counting paper clips. If they only knew that their million-dollar deals crossed my desk every morning waiting for my signature." Global Supply Solutions, my little supply company, had quietly become the largest industrial supplier in North America, though I'd kept the ownership private through a maze of holding companies. "Emma, darling." Aunt Patricia's voice dripped with false sweetness as she approached. "We missed you at the country club charity gala last month. Too busy with your... what is it you do again?" "Supply chain management," I replied simply, watching her eyes glaze over with disinterest. "Oh yes, your little business. Well, not everyone can work in high finance like Bradley and Jennifer." She patted my hand condescendingly. "At least you're trying." I thought about the meeting scheduled for Monday, where Bradley's department would have to explain why they were 3 months behind on payments to their main supplier. My supplier. The irony would have been delicious if it wasn't so predictable. My phone buzzed, a text from my CFO. "Morgan Stanley contracts ready for review. Do we proceed with the rate increase?" "Hold until Monday," I texted back. Family reunion getting interesting. Uncle George, the self-appointed patriarch since my father's passing, clinked his glass for attention. "Gather round, everyone. Time for our annual family business review." This tradition had started 3 years ago, a chance for the successful family members to boast about their corporate achievements while subtly belittling those of us who'd chosen different paths. "Bradley, why don't you start?" Uncle George beamed at his son. "Tell us about your latest triumph at Morgan Stanley." Bradley stood, straightening his custom-made suit. "We've just closed a major deal with Atlantic Corporation, $10 million in new business, all thanks to our superior banking relationships." I suppressed a smile. Atlantic Corp had chosen Morgan Stanley because I'd recommended them, a fact Bradley would discover soon enough. "And Jennifer," Uncle George continued, "how's the expansion going?" My cousin smoothed her Chanel dress. "Miller Consulting is now handling supply chain optimization for 3 Fortune 500 companies. Some of us understand how real business works." The dig was aimed at me, but I just sipped my champagne. Miller Consulting's optimization had actually created the vulnerabilities I'd exploited to build my empire. "Emma." Uncle George's tone changed to one of obligatory inclusion. "Any news from your enterprise?" All eyes turned to me, expecting the usual modest update about small contracts and local clients. Instead, I stood straightening my simple but elegant suit. "Actually, yes. Global Supply Solutions just acquired its 15th international subsidiary." "Subsidiary?" Bradley scoffed. "Don't you mean you got another storage warehouse?" I pulled out my phone, pulling up our latest corporate overview. "More like we now control 60% of industrial supply chains in North America and Europe." Jennifer laughed nervously. "That's impossible. The major suppliers are all owned by shell companies?" I finished for her. "Holding corporations? Private equity firms? Funny how those work, isn't it?" The atmosphere shifted slightly. Uncle George frowned, probably trying to remember if he'd ever actually looked into what I did. "Still playing entrepreneur?" Bradley teased, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. "Real business happens in corporate." I smiled, thinking of their company's million-dollar contracts sitting on my desk. "You should check who owns your supplier." "What's that supposed to mean?" Jennifer demanded. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. The CFO had sent an urgent update. Morgan Stanley had missed another payment deadline. "Excuse me," I said, standing. "I need to take this. Bradley, you might want to check your email. Something about overdue payments to Global Supply Solutions." The color drained from his face as he frantically pulled out his phone. I walked toward the house, pausing just long enough to hear him whisper, "Oh my God." Inside my uncle's study, I connected to a video call with my executive team. The wall of screens showed our global operations, a network that had taken 10 years to build while my family dismissed me as a small-time entrepreneur. "Mr. Miller from Morgan Stanley is requesting an urgent meeting," my assistant reported. "Shall I tell him you're unavailable?" "No," I smiled. "Schedule it for Monday. And make sure the conference room has a good view of our company logo." The story of how I'd built this empire was one of patience and strategic invisibility. After my father's death, the family had written me off, the daughter who'd turned down a Wall Street career to play with supply chains. What they hadn't noticed was how I'd systematically bought out their suppliers, consolidated shipping networks and modernized outdated systems. While they bragged about million-dollar deals, I was quietly orchestrating billion-dollar acquisitions. A knock at the study door interrupted my thoughts. It was Aunt Patricia looking flustered. "Emma darling, Bradley just got some rather concerning news about his supplier. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" I pulled up our corporate structure on my laptop, turning it to face her. Her eyes widened as she saw the familiar company names, all leading back to Global Supply Solutions. "Oh my," she whispered. "Does this mean that your children's real business success depends entirely on my little company?" "Yes, it does." The Monday morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Global Supply Solutions headquarters, the view of Manhattan stretching out below. I sat at my desk watching the Morgan Stanley building through my telescope, a gift I'd bought myself after my first billion. Bradley would be arriving soon. His weekend had undoubtedly been hellish, discovering that his supplier problems went straight to the top, to the cousin he'd spent years mocking. "Miss Miller," my assistant's voice came through the intercom, "your cousins are here." "All of them?" I raised an eyebrow. "All?" "Bradley, Jennifer, and their father. Mr. George Miller insists on joining the meeting." Of course he did. Uncle George would want to handle this family matter personally. "Send them up." "And Sarah?" "Activate Protocol Legacy." The office transformed silently. Hidden screens descended, displaying real-time data from our global operations. The subtle lighting shifted to illuminate the awards and acquisitions documents lining the walls, each one representing a piece of the empire I'd built while they weren't watching. The elevator doors opened and they entered, Bradley looking disheveled, Jennifer clutching her designer bag like a shield, and Uncle George trying to maintain his patriarchal dignity. "Emma," Uncle George began, his voice attempting authority, "we need to discuss this situation." "Situation?" I gestured to the visitor chairs. "You mean how Morgan Stanley is 3 months behind on payments? Or how Miller Consulting's client base depends entirely on my infrastructure?" Jennifer sank into a chair. "How long? How long have you owned everything?" I pressed a button and the screens showed a timeline 10 years of strategic acquisitions, each one carefully concealed behind different corporate names. "Remember when you laughed at me for buying that failing logistics company in Ohio?" I looked at Bradley. "That was the beginning. While you were bragging about million-dollar bonuses, I was quietly building a supply chain empire." "But the names," Bradley protested. "Global Solutions Partners International Logistics Holdings. All subsidiaries of Global Supply Solutions. My company." I pulled up their contracts on the main screen. "Your companies aren't just clients, they're dependent on us for survival." Uncle George stepped forward. "Now see here, Emma. We're family. You can't just dash." "Family?" I interrupted, opening my desk drawer. "Like when you told Dad his supply chain ideas were worthless. When you convinced him to sell his shares for pennies." I placed my father's old business plan on the desk, the one Uncle George had dismissed 15 years ago. He wanted to modernize, digitize, create an integrated global network. "You called it a pipe dream." "That was different," Uncle George muttered. "Times were different." "No, you were different. You saw business as a way to maintain power, to keep the family hierarchy exactly as you wanted it." I stood walking to the window. "I saw it as a way to build something revolutionary." Jennifer leaned forward. "What do you want?" "Money. A bigger share of the family trust." I laughed. "I made more last quarter than the entire family trust is worth." "This isn't about money." "Then what?" Bradley demanded. I pressed another button and the screens showed our employee benefits program, community initiatives, and sustainability projects. "This is about legacy. Real legacy, not the kind you buy with trust funds and country club memberships." I turned to face them. "Dad believed business could be both profitable and purposeful. You all mocked him for it. So I built what he envisioned, just not in his name." "Your little company," Jennifer whispered, realization dawning. "Powers half the global supply chain," I finished. "Those Fortune 500 clients you brag about. They work with you because I allow it. The deals you close at Morgan Stanley? They happen because my infrastructure makes them possible." Uncle George sank into a chair, his arrogance finally cracking. "What happens now?" I picked up 3 folders from my desk. "Now you choose. Option 1. We maintain the current arrangement but with updated terms. Your companies start paying on time and you acknowledge who really runs things. Option 2. Bradley asked quietly. I find new partners. Morgan Stanley isn't the only bank in New York. Miller Consulting isn't the only firm that needs our network. And option 3? Jennifer's voice trembled slightly. You join me. Not as entitled cousins, but as employees who need to earn their positions. Learn the business from the ground up like I did. The silence that followed was heavy with decades of shifted power dynamics. You'd let us work for you? Bradley asked incredulously. After everything? Dad believed in second chances, I said softly. He also believed that real respect is earned, not inherited. I walked to a wall of photos, employees, facilities, community projects. This is what real business looks like. Not quarterly bonuses or country club deals, but building something that matters. Uncle George stood slowly, examining the empire his niece had built while he wasn't looking. Your father. He would be proud. I know, I replied. Because I built this using everything he taught me, everything you dismissed. My phone buzzed, another acquisition was complete. While my family had been discovering my true position, I'd been buying their largest competitor. You have until Friday to decide, I said, returning to my desk. Oh, and about the family reunion next month. They looked up expectantly. It's being held at my corporate retreat center. I bought the Hampton estate last week. Their faces showed the final realization that the cousin they'd underestimated hadn't just succeeded, she'd revolutionized their entire understanding of success. As they left, visibly shaken, my assistant entered with a familiar document, Dad's original business plan. Should I frame it? She asked. No, I smiled. Keep it on my desk. Some dreams don't need frames. They just need someone stubborn enough to make them real. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong, it's proving your father right. And as I watched my family's cars pull away from the building that bore my company's name, I knew that success isn't about who has the biggest office or the most impressive title. It's about building something that lasts, something that matters, something that transforms, playing entrepreneur into changing the world. And if that transformation happens to teach your privileged family a lesson about underestimating the quiet